All right, so welcome to English 12A in our paced class. Hopefully you've taken a chance to look over the pacing guide. So one of the things that would be super helpful, especially because we're meeting on Thursdays, is if before the class, any of the tutorials that are listed in the do this week, tutorials and mastery tests, do the tutorials before class. You can skip the lesson activities if you want, or try them out, and then we're always going to go over the lesson activities in class. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept of flipped classrooms. I don't know how much experience you may have had with it, but that's sort of how I want this to work. So in a flipped classroom, it's like the opposite of regular teaching, I guess. Basically, instead of having your lecture and whatever in a class, you do all that before coming to class, and then in class we go over more of the homeworky stuff. I think that'll work best for this, especially because when I was prepping for going over the lesson activities, I was like, whoa, a lot of this stuff is really hard. This is really difficult language. It's just dense. And then I looked at the sample answers and they were crazy. It was just let me give you this insane essay about this topic, which I never expect from students. So yeah, we'll just move on from there. Anyway, so every week, check out the pacing guide, see what you're expected to do, and then try and have those tutorials at least gone through before coming to class. It will make everything make a lot more sense to you, and then that way you're on track. You can finish up your lesson activities and be ready to go. So on that note, we can go ahead and move along to checking out the curriculum. Hello, additional student. So we're going to be focusing on Unit 1 for the first 2 weeks because, again, like I said, there is some really in-depth language going on here. So you've got sort of this history of English thing where you've got some early Middle English stuff going on. You have Beowulf, which is its whole other thing, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and then Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales. So originally I had it set up so you were going to do the first 3 tutorials and we were going to go over those, but I looked at it and it's too much, I think, to do in one day. So I split it up, and we'll definitely have time to go over those 2 tutorials and then do some test prep for you for next week. So yeah, we can go ahead and get started. So basically what we're going to do is I'm just going to pull up tutorials, go to the lesson activity, and then we'll talk about it. I won't necessarily answer the question for you. I'm not going to say, this is what I want you to type into your lesson activity box. That's not where I'm going with this. What I want you to do for the lesson activities, though, is just make sure that you are doing your best to follow along and understand. All right, so cool. We're going to just start from the top. So the first tutorial in our history of the English language, the first lesson activity is on increasing your vocabulary. So these are actually some skills that we're going to talk about today that I'm huge fans of. So the first one is understanding context clues. So hopefully you've had some experience of the idea of context clues. I'm just trying to remember which one. Okay, it must be this one. Okay, yeah, scroll down. Okay, so what a context clue is that you're trying to understand the meaning of a word in the context of a sentence. So if you don't know what context means, think about what I just said. You're trying to understand the meaning in the context of the sentence. So based off of what the sentence is saying, if there's only one word you don't know in that sentence, you can get an idea of what the meaning is. So if you look at the linked thing, it kind of goes through like all sorts of different ways that context clues appear. So we have synonym or comparison, definition, example, contrast, experience, and then like the idea of substitution. And that's kind of what this goes into. Substitute a blank for the word that you don't know, and then try and think of a word that fits in with that. So I do recommend reviewing this, just kind of getting the idea of what's going on down. It can be super useful. So let's at least go over this first one. Like, I will talk to you about it, and then I can kind of show you, I'll show you what the sample answer says, because why not? But I just want you to get that idea of kind of what these look like and what the process is. So the noxious, and noxious is the word that we're looking at, fumes of ammonia and bleach filled her nostrils and overwhelmed her. She hit the ground with a loud thwack. So we have quite a few clues this to kind of get us in there. So oops, I have a feeling if I don't have this open it. So we're looking at noxious here. And then, so we have ammonia and bleach, and also fumes. It helps if you know the word fumes, right? But then we have nostrils. So we can probably figure out that this has something to do with the nose, right? So fumes, nostrils, ammonia, bleach. Okay, so you're smelling something, you're breathing something in, and then she hits the ground. So if somebody faints from something that they smell, that's usually a bad thing. And so we can gather that noxious is a negative word. We'll talk about it a little bit later on, about another word that we could use for that. So we know it's a negative word, so we can guess that it sort of has something to do with the word toxic, right? And if you're familiar with ammonia and bleach, it's like, it's really bad. So here we kind of get what it says with the sample answer, right? Noxious probably means overpowering, maybe poisonous. They're highly toxic substances. And so going through a sentence like that is really how you can use the context around the word to help you. One of the other things that it brings up too is that sometimes it just tells you what it is in the middle of it, like it'll give you the definition, and we can kind of see that in the second one. So some race car drivers think they are invincible. Their hubris often causes them to take unnecessary risks. So you can kind of go through that same process again. Even if we're going to talk about the answers and show them, just always remember that it's never okay to copy and paste them. It's not okay to type all of the words that are there. Do your best to try and, state things in your own words. Again, it doesn't have to be these like flowing paragraphs of explanation for something that can be said in 1 or 2 sentences. The only time I want to see a lot of writing is when it's an essay. So don't worry about it so much with the tutorials. I probably won't be angry with just a couple of sentences, as long as I know you understand. All right, so moving on from context clues, we have connotation and denotation. So let's see, I'll close that one. Okay, so connotation and denotation is basically how words are more than words. So a connotation is like this floating aura meaning of a word, whereas denotation is the dictionary definition of the word. A second. I'm gonna go ahead and stop. I really want my video to show up here, and I don't know why it's not. So I'm gonna hide everybody that's got their video on, only so that maybe I can have my video show up. Okay, let's try that. I feel weird not having it recording me while I'm talking. Okay, so denotation, dictionary definition of the word. I have a few examples sort of like connotation and denotation that I like to use, but one of them is homeless person versus like a bum, right? So one word is negative and one word isn't. You know, one word is just what the word means, right? So the connotation of the word bum is negative. Like when somebody says that, like, oh, look at that bum, you know that they're being negative. And that's kind of what connotation is. So it's that like surrounding meaning when it comes to the word. I don't know why it's not only showing me. Okay, anyway. So yeah. So then what you're asked to do for question 2 in the several parts here is really just define like which word is positive and which word is negative. So you have smelly and fragrant, right? So one of those words like, oh, your gym shoes are quite smelly, or oh, your gym shoes are quite fragrant, right? Like one of those clearly being more negative than the other, unless you're trying to be ironic. So that's basically what you're going to do for these. Shouldn't be too terrible for you. You have cheap and frugal, strong-willed and stubborn, conceited and self-confident. It's a big one, okay? And then the last one here is just about word origins. So there's another article and just kind of talks about like where a lot of our words come from. You've probably dealt with some of this kind of stuff before in your classes. One thing that I thought was super interesting when I got to college that I didn't know, because of all of this stuff where we're dealing with like Latin and Greek roots all the time, I just sort of assumed that English had evolved from those languages. It didn't. It's actually a Germanic language, which I think has more to do with like grammar structure and stuff. But we have a lot of words that come from other languages, which I'm sure you have experienced in the past, but you might not necessarily know where they all come from. So for this one, you are probably going to want to have this out because it does ask you to like break down the words based off of their prefix and stuff to like figure it out and what language they come from. And so it does tell you like this are derived from Latin, these are derived from Latin, because it's asking you to define the underlying word below, identify its affixes and prefixes, or affixes, which are suffixes and or prefixes, as well as the roots. So you'll probably want to have this open and then you can sort of go through it. Let's see, hold on. Cool. So a feature that might be super helpful that you have available in Google Chrome, pretty much any browser, like any thing. If you're on a PC or like a Chromebook, if you hold down the control button on your keyboard and F and just tap F, a little search bar pops up. Sorry, I'm using a Mac, so if you're on a Mac, it's the Command F. And then this little search bar pops up, and so you can look stuff up like on the page, so you're not scrolling through trying to find it. It'll make things a lot quicker for you. So I definitely recommend trying that out. So like, for example, pandemic, all, and then I can go back and search and see if dem is in here. Let's see. So I can like go through like this. Okay, so ick, relating to. Okay, so we've got that, right? All, relating to. So yeah, you can just sort of go through and break it down like that. So that's pretty much what you're asked to do for that first one. Hopefully that helps and makes things a little bit easier for you. I am a nerd and think that that stuff is kind of fun. So yeah. Okay. Now, this is where it starts getting a little bit heavier, is getting into some of these histories. So one thing I will say, these lesson activities, this is asking you for a lot. It asks for quite a bit of writing. There's kind of a lot going on here. I did not make good notes for myself on this. So really for this, we're looking at what the tone is, how Caesar is described, how the battles are portrayed, and then the relationship with Rome and France. So if we go to here, so we're going to look at this first one for those first few questions. Caius Julius Caesar, the first Roman that came into Britain. So first off, from the title alone, you know that if Julius Caesar is the first Roman to come to Britain, they have not previously had much of a relationship going on. What you're going to be doing with this is really just like looking for some of these descriptions. Sorry, short-term memory loss here. So the overall tone of the passage, just by like glancing over it, it's sort of a tone of awe, I think, just kind of explaining everything that's going on. So this is saying the tone of the passage is formal, but look, one sentence. I think it is formal, and what that means is like the language that it's written in. It's not conversational. It's not something that you're just going to say like for the sake of saying it. He is writing this down to be something that stays in history. So it is a formal tone, but I also think that it has like kind of this tone of awe based off of the way that everything's being described. So I'll read this one. I'm not going to read the next one because it is pretty long. This is a little short, and I will zoom it in a bit once I can move this one over. Okay. So Britain had never been visited by Romans and was indeed entirely unknown to them before the time of Caius Julius Caesar, who in the year 693 after the building of Rome, but the 60th year before the incarnation of our Lord, was the consul with Lucius Bibulus, and afterwards, while he made war upon the Germans and the Gauls, which were divided only by the river Rhine, came to the province of the Moroni, from whence is the nearest and shortest passage to Britain. So we know that the Germans are the Germans. The Gauls, that's a word for the French. That's what the French were originally called. They were the Gauls. So just so you know, when it comes to asking about the relationship with the French, that's where we are. Here, having provided about 80 ships of burden and vessels with oars, he sailed over into Britain, where, being first roughly handled in a battle and then meeting with a violent storm, he lost a considerable part of his fleet, no small number of soldiers, and almost all his horses. Returning to Gaul, he put his legions into winter quarters and gave orders for building 600 sail of both sorts. With these, he again passed over early in spring into Britain, but whilst he was marching with a large army towards the enemy, the ships riding at anchor were, by a tempest, either dashed against one another or driven upon the sands and wrecked. 40 of them perished, the rest were, with much difficulty, repaired. The word tempest means like a big, wild storm. There is a Shakespeare play called The Tempest, and deals with a lot of this stuff, or like storm stuff. It's like a metaphor, but you can again use context clues, right? So we know that the ships are at sea, they're getting dashed against one another, driven up on the sands and wrecked. So we can imagine a tempest is some sort of storm that affects the water. Caesar's cavalry was, at the first charge, defeated by the Britons and Labienus, the tribune, slain. In the second engagement, he, with a great hazard to his men, put the Britons to flight. Okay, so again, we're looking at this and how are the battles in the story portrayed. Frankly, they're quite short, but they also seem really violent. It's just going on to sort of describe like the remains of what's going on here. The remains of these are still to be seen to this day, but apparently about the thickness of man's side. Like, they're not good. They're difficult. Things aren't going well. How is Caesar described? You know, we're just looking at those kind of things. Yeah, he is a leader, and he is really just pushing forward. He's relentless, I think is a good way to put it, because no matter how many times, like, he's failing, whether it's just like the storms or the problems with the ships, all of that, he keeps coming back. And then what does the excerpt imply about Rome's relationship with France? So he keeps going back and forth. So he's from Rome and he keeps going back to France, or Gaul in this case, right? So it seems like they probably have a pretty positive relationship. I don't even like necessarily care if you guys do, honestly, question 2. I think it's a little dense. If there's anything that was important from this that comes up for the test prep, I'll make note of it and let you know. I recommend reading it, check out the sample answers, but you can go ahead and leave question 2, those parts, blank for this one. That's one of the fun parts about these PACE classes too, is I get to adjust the curriculum. Okay. Sorry, it's a little warm, and if I turn on my air conditioner, no one can hear me. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting activity. We're gonna kind of speed through this one too. But so you're reading a sentence from the Old Testament's Ecclesiastes, and then George Orwell, a famous author, revised the sentence so it says, designed to illustrate bad habits he found in the written work of his time. And so we're just going to compare them. This says, like, describe and make this whole, like, essay. If you look at the sample answer, it is 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like 5 paragraphs long. We don't need to do that much. You guys can write bullet points for this if you want to, just because usually in compare and contrast, it's a little bit easier to look at it that way. So the original sentence, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth. So then you have Orwell's revised in modern English of the worst sort. Objective consideration of contemporary phenomena compels the conclusion that success or failure in competitive activities exhibits no tendency to be commensurate with innate capacity, but that considerable element of the unpredictable must invariably be taken into account. Okay. So the first thing that jumps out to me is the difference in the language, right? So the original sentence is short words, simple syllables, easy to understand. The second one is full of really intense words. Like, I'm even stumbling over myself. So there's just like the vocabulary is significantly enhanced. The original version is using the first person, I returned, so I did this, I saw this, I understood this, and then the second one is in third person. It's not really coming from like a person so much. Let's see. There's a lot more adjectives in the second one. The original is, again, a lot more straight to the point, so it doesn't have as much description. It's really just about like the nouns themselves, whereas the revision is just, yeah, it's a lot more descriptive using those adjectives. And then I would also say that it's they're appealing to different audiences. Orwell is definitely going to be appealing to a different audience than the original writing, just based off of his language use. It is not meant for everybody, whereas especially being part of the Bible, it is a little bit more meant for everybody, or I mean the Old Testament. But yeah, so those are just some points that you could totally note down for this. It really, yeah, that's good. You don't have to structure it into a paragraph, just the bullet points is totally fine. And so those are the lesson activities from the first tutorial. The Beowulf tutorial, I really wish that didn't autoplay. The Beowulf tutorial only has one lesson activity. What I wanted to do was go over the definitions of these words in the table with you, and then I want you to try and find the examples on your own. Some of them will be easier than others, but also something that I noticed when I was reading over this is that a couple of them get pointed out to you. I totally saw one that was like for what, like a kenning, yeah, so you have like kenning for Beowulf, right? And so that's what these little footnotes indicate. It's like what's over here. So some of them you'll be able to find. Okay, so kenning, the definition here is a compound word or phrase that's also a metaphor. So remember that a metaphor is comparing two unlike things without using like or as, so merely stating that something is. So the moon is a wheel of cheese would be a metaphor, whereas the moon is like a wheel of cheese would be a simile. So kenning uses a metaphor. So a compound word or phrase is also a metaphor. I just pointed out where you can find an example. Synecdoche is a part that represents the whole. I think the example is like, and here is something about like a ship or whatever, but it would be like, I always have trouble finding, like, giving an example of synecdoche. I'll come back if I can come up with the one that I usually use in my head. I'm having a hard time with it. Alliteration is another really common one. This is also like a rhetorical device that gets used often. And the way that it's used in Beowulf is actually really interesting too. But alliteration is the repetition of a consonant sound at the beginning of a sentence. So, like, she sells seashells by the seashore, that's using alliteration to make a tongue twister. If you look at Beowulf, there is a lot of alliteration that's used. Cry of the conquered, clamorous pain from captive of hell too closely. Like, I mean, there is a ton of alliteration in here. Really, all you have to do is just like look where you see a bunch of the same letter. Here's another one for the hardy hero with hand he grasped. Like, you're getting a lot of that. Felt for the foe with fiendish. Like, there's a ton of alliteration in there. Hubris, which actually popped up in one of our earlier lesson activities, connections. Hubris is, we kind of had that connection, what was it, invincible? So if somebody thinks they're invincible, are they really invincible? No, nobody's really invincible. So there's an arrogance that goes to that. The definition that you're given for this lesson is arrogant pride, but it's that idea like, I'm invincible, I can do whatever I want, nothing is going to matter. So that's what hubris is. You can definitely find examples of that in Beowulf. You'll see when we watch like a little summary of what we've got here. I figured that was better than me reading it to you. An epithet is the use of an adjective or a phrase to name a character. I have an example here, but I really hope I could find another one really easily. The mighty chief. that could refer, I'm sorry, I'm out of context. I don't really know who it's referring to. It looks like it's the king here, Hrothgar. So the mighty chief, that's an epithet, because that's using a adjective or phrase instead of the name of somebody. So that's all that means. And then the warrior code, that's not like a literary technique. It is the rule of conduct that people use in war, but it's part of epics. So Beowulf is an epic, which is a long form poem that usually describes some sort of hero, and he's got a flaw and going through the whole thing. But yeah, it's the rule of conduct to which a hero in an epic adheres. And you can totally, like, Beowulf is kind of a story about having like a code. All right, so, and then when we're gonna watch this video, and then I would just like you to think about these 3 themes. If you go through after we watch the little video, if you go through the story and read it afterwards, kind of after already knowing what it's about, it can really help. So I want you to look at the 3 themes: envy consuming characters, revenge leading to death, and generosity and hospitality. So those are the big 3 that we're looking for, and all of them definitely come up. And then I'm just going to talk about this part while we're here. You don't have to do it in 200 to 300 words, but I would like it if you would just talk about envy and revenge being parts of Beowulf, and then if you can provide examples, that's super awesome. Like I said, it definitely comes up, and your little footnotes that are kind of included over here on this side can help guide you to see where you're going. So I can't pull up the video and have the text on screen, but I do want you to know that it does kind of follow along. Like you get a little summary in these different parts, because this is just like excerpts. So we have the beginning kind of explains what happened before, and then there's a little bit of break, and then, okay, here's some more explanation, and go down. And the story, this video and the explanation just sort of explains that. So I'm going to play the video for you. It's pretty short. I think it's only like 5 minutes. Yeah, it's 5 minutes long. It's less about the video and more about what's being said. If you happen to have paper and pencil and you want to make a few notes just about the story, and it might help you. There are also, as you can see on this side, like this, I don't know, this thug notes. Wish I would have found that, might have showed you that, but I've already approved this video. If you're having trouble, you can totally find summaries of a lot of these stories online, and it's really helpful. Totally tried to look for ones for those BD stories earlier. Was not successful, otherwise we would have watched them. But this is a really useful summary. Like I said, it definitely goes with the excerpts that you have here. I mean, it's the whole story is provided to you here, and then this video is going to do it. I am going to stop talking about the video and just play it for you.
In Daneland, noble King Hrothgar built a large mead hall called Heorot, so that his people will have a central gathering place. During one celebration, Grendel, a monster who dwells in the marshes nearby, hears their reveling and is seized with jealousy. As he bursts through the doors of the hall, the Dane's weapons are useless against the monster's hardened flesh, and he easily carries off a Dane to eat. For 12 long years, Grendel raids the mead hall, devouring Thane after Thane. None of Hrothgar's men is strong enough or bold enough to deal with the monster. Oversea, in the land of the Geats, Beowulf, a Geat warrior, hears of Grendel's doings and of Hrothgar's misery. He gathers 14 brave companions and sets sail for Daneland to kill the monster and relieve the aged king. When he arrives, Hrothgar fondly remembers Beowulf's father and welcomes him. Beowulf confidently promises the king that he can destroy Grendel, and he will even fight him unarmed. That night, Beowulf and his men celebrate with Hrothgar and the Danes and Heret. But when all of the others have gone to sleep, Beowulf stays awake, waiting for the monster. He does not wait long. Soon Grendel rips open the doors of the mead hall and quickly kills one of the sleeping warriors. He then advances toward Beowulf, who leaps up and fights him in a fierce hand-to-hand struggle. With his tremendous grip, Beowulf tears Grendel's shoulder from its socket, and the bleeding monster retreats to his den in the marsh, howling with agony and rage. He will not survive the wound. At dawn, the warriors flock to the mead hall to hear the news. Everyone is overjoyed, and Hrothgar, in gratitude, gives many gifts to Beowulf. However, in the marsh, Grendel's mother has watched her son die a slow, agonizing death, and filled with rage, she comes the next night to avenge Grendel. On this night, Beowulf is asleep in a separate room when the she-devil storms into the hall, seizing Hrothgar's favorite advisor and devouring him before escaping back to her lair. Hearing this news, Beowulf takes his sword and goes to hunt the female monster. After traveling through the waters for many hours, he meets her near the sea bottom, and she drags him to her den. There he sees Grendel lying dead. After a desperate and almost fatal struggle with the monster, he kills her and swims upward in triumph, taking with him Grendel's head as a trophy. Joy is renewed at Heret, and Hrothgar showers Beowulf with more treasures. When Beowulf sets sail to return to his home, Hrothgar weeps and laments his departure. When Beowulf arrives in his own land, his king Hygelac welcomes him home as a great hero. 50 years later, Beowulf has become king of his own people, the Geats. One day, a slave stumbles across a dragon guarding a hoard of treasure and secretly steals a golden cup. When the dragon discovers the thievery, he seeks revenge by attacking the Geat people. Beowulf, now around 70 years old, meets the dragon in battle. After an intense fight, Beowulf succeeds in killing the beast, but not before the dragon can sink his venomous teeth into Beowulf's neck. Fatally wounded, Beowulf briefly finds solace in winning the dragon's massive golden treasure for his people, and then he dies. The grief of the Geats is inexpressible. They determine, however, to leave nothing undone to honor the memory of their king. A great funeral pyre is built, and his body is burnt. Then a memorial barrow is made, visible from a great distance, so that even sailors far away may be constantly reminded of the greatness of the national hero of Geatland. The poem closes with a glowing tribute to Beowulf's bravery, his gentleness, his goodness of heart, and his generosity.
All right. Hopefully you found that interesting. I thought it was pretty cool. Also, what a wild story, right? Like, this dude just shows up and he's like, yeah, I'll kill that monster. And then he does, and his mom comes, and then he has to kill her. And then he's like this king, and then there's a dragon. Like, whew, story is really old. Yeah. So basically, that's all that this is saying. It's actually a lot. This is like so translated. Be very thankful that you are not given the original English version to read through. But yeah, so, go through it and find those examples. But you can totally see, right? Like envy, consuming a character. That's like the whole thing with Grendel. That's like why he comes down there, because he's like you said, thing, like, oh, they're celebrating, haha, I'm so mad about it, I'm gonna ruin everything for 12 years, right? And then we've got revenge. So mom comes to seek revenge, and then she dies. And then generosity and hospitality. So like Beowulf just comes along. He is like, I will save you. And then the king is like, oh yes, thank you so much. Here is all this hospitality for you. So you have those examples. If you can find like the exact ones out of the story, that'd be great. But then just sort of give a few sentences for how those themes are brought up. And those are the 2 tutorials that we are covering. All right. And then, so before next class, what I'd love for you to do is already go over the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and then the Chaucer and Canterbury Tales one. And we'll do this again, unless you absolutely hated this. If you did, please send me your complaints somehow, and I will take them into consideration. But I really hope that you found going over the material this way useful, and that you'll keep coming to class and hopefully learn a whole lot. So if you are also in the 12B class, it is a different link. I did that on purpose. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Enjoy 18 minutes where I'm not talking. But yeah, thanks so much for coming to this first class. Definitely let me know if you have any questions. You can email me, message me in Adventum, or message me in Google Classrooms. But thank you all so much for coming. I look forward to more interaction later on in class, and we'll talk later. Goodbye.